Picture this: a bustling city where everyone is rushing to get ahead, to make their mark. A woman, a waitress, tired of serving others who don't see her for who she truly is, decides to take a step that will change her life forever. In a world where the rich are served with a smile and the poor are ignored, one moment of compassion sets the stage for a journey that will test her strength, her resolve, and her understanding of what it really means to make a difference. But what happens when doing the right thing turns everything upside down? What if kindness comes with a price you never expected to pay? This is a story of redemption, of change. Stay tuned as we dive into this unforgettable journey. And don't forget to comment down below and tell us where you're watching from. Jasmine's first day as a waitress at the Diamond Grill had been nothing like what she'd expected. She had walked into the job interview months ago, hopeful but unsure of what the upscale restaurant scene would be like. The shiny silverware, the gleaming wine glasses, and the polished wood floors made it clear this wasn't a place for someone like her, but she was determined to make it work. She needed the job. The Diamond Grill catered to the wealthy, serving high-end meals to well-dressed patrons who cared little about the people behind the scenes. And from the moment she stepped through the door, Jasmine understood the hierarchy. The servers, always on their feet and polite but distant, were there to serve. The managers were distant and arrogant, and the customers? They were royalty. Jasmine's job wasn't just about delivering food. It was about making sure the elite felt important, pampered, and above reproach. Carl, the manager, embodied that ethos perfectly. He was a man in his 40s, always impeccably dressed in a suit that looked like it came from a designer store. His cold demeanor matched his attire. He walked through the restaurant like he owned the place, and most days it seemed like he did. When he passed by, he never acknowledged the staff, except to bark out commands. Carl's attitude towards the customers was just as dismissive. He fawned over the wealthy clients, practically tripping over himself to ensure they were comfortable. He would regularly bring out complimentary desserts for the upper-crust diners, always giving them something extra to make them feel special. But when it came to the less fortunate, people who looked out of place in the lavish surroundings, his behavior was drastically different. One evening, just before the dinner rush, Jasmine found herself preparing the dining area when the door swung open. The bell above the door jingled, and in walked an elderly man who looked out of place in the polished, upscale environment. His coat was worn and dirty, and his shoes were scuffed, but his face held the wisdom of someone who had seen much of life's hardships. He shuffled in hesitantly, scanning the room, unsure of where to go. Jasmine immediately noticed him, noticing how he took a step back when his eyes fell on the expensive decor, as if he were about to turn around. Jasmine's heart went out to him. She had seen people like him before, those who felt they didn't belong in a world so focused on appearance and status. But Jasmine knew better. She had learned early on not to judge people by how they looked. She had grown up in a tough neighborhood, surrounded by people who were just trying to survive, no matter what they wore or how much they had. And the elderly man in front of her needed a kind word and a welcoming face. She stepped forward, offering a warm smile. "Hi there. Can I help you find a seat?" she asked gently. The man hesitated, looking up at her with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. I don't know if I belong here," he said, his voice shaky with age. Jasmine felt a pang of sympathy for him. "You belong here just as much as anyone," she said, her voice kind and reassuring. "Come on, I'll find you a seat." She gestured to the table closest to the window, a small but cozy spot where he could watch the people outside as he ate. As they walked to the table, Carl appeared in the corner of her eye, watching them with a raised brow. He made no effort to mask his disapproval, but Jasmine ignored him. The man sat down carefully, his hands trembling slightly as he settled into the chair. "What can I get you today?" Jasmine asked, giving him the restaurant's menu. He glanced down at it, unsure, his eyes scanning the prices. It was clear he wasn't comfortable with the extravagant dishes listed on the menu. He seemed almost embarrassed by the idea of ordering anything. I'm not sure I can afford any of this," he mumbled, his eyes lowering in shame. Jasmine shook her head. a soft smile playing on her lips. "Don't worry about that. You're welcome here, sir. I'll bring you something small on the house." She walked to the kitchen to place his order. When she returned, she could feel Carl's eyes burning into her back. She knew he would not approve of her actions. Offering food for free went against everything he believed in. If you couldn't pay, you didn't get to enjoy the experience. But Jasmine wasn't concerned with what Carl thought. What mattered was that the elderly man, Mr. Samuel, as she later learned, felt welcomed. His face lit up when she returned with a warm bowl of soup and a slice of bread. The kindness he'd been shown filled his eyes with tears, and he thanked her profusely. Jasmine left the table with a heavy heart. She knew Carl wouldn't stand for this. The restaurant was run by a strict set of rules, and helping someone who couldn't pay went against the entire system. But what Carl didn't understand was that sometimes kindness needed to come before business. She didn't think about the consequences. She just wanted to help someone who needed it. She caught Carl's eyes as she walked past him on her way to another table. He had seen everything. His expression darkened, and for the rest of the night, Jasmine could feel his glare on her, a constant reminder that she had broken his unspoken rules. But despite his disapproval, Jasmine knew she had made the right choice. There was no way she would apologize for showing kindness to someone in need. The next morning, as Jasmine walked into the Diamond Grill, she immediately sensed something was off. The usual hustle and bustle of the morning prep seemed subdued, almost tense. It wasn't until she got behind the bar and started organizing her supplies that she realized Carl was nowhere to be seen. A strange unease settled in her stomach as she checked her phone, expecting a text or a call from him, but there was nothing. It wasn't long before Jasmine was summoned to the back office. Carl's presence there was as cold as ever, his usual sharp suit and even sharper attitude in full effect. He motioned for her to take a seat. "Jasmine, sit down. We need to talk," Carl said, his tone clipped. Jasmine took a deep breath. She knew what was coming. She braced herself for a reprimand about her kindness toward Mr. Samuel. "I have to say, you've been making things complicated," Carl continued. "You gave food away to a homeless man last night, someone who couldn't even afford a drink. That's against the rules. This isn't a soup kitchen. It's a restaurant. We don't give away food for free here." Jasmine's hands clenched in her lap. She had been expecting this, but hearing it out loud still hurt. "He was hungry, Carl. He needed help, and I gave it to him." Carl's gaze hardened. "You've got to understand that this is a business. We can't afford to lose money over something like this. You need to stop acting like you're running a charity. If everyone who came in here asked for a free meal, where would we be?" Jasmine opened her mouth to argue, but Carl's voice interrupted her before she could get a word out. "You're lucky I'm not firing you over this, Jasmine. I'm giving you a warning. Don't make this mistake again," Carl added, his eyes narrowing. Jasmine's heart raced, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She wanted to stand up for herself, to say that kindness was more important than business, but she knew better. She had a job to do, and losing it would only make things worse. "Understood, Carl," she said quietly, her voice low. Carl gave her one last cold look before dismissing her. "Get back to work." As Jasmine walked out of the office, she could feel her heart sinking. She had done the right thing, but it felt like the world was punishing her for it. Carl's judgmental eyes lingered on her all throughout her shift, and she could feel the silent tension building. But there was one thing Jasmine knew for sure. No matter what happened, she wouldn't regret helping Mr. Samuel. Kindness, she believed, was never wrong, even if it came with a price. Later that evening, after the dinner rush had calmed down, Jasmine found herself waiting by the back door, taking a few moments to breathe. The weight of the day, of Carl's words, of the tension, was too much. She had been working at the Diamond Grill for months, and yet it still felt like she didn't truly belong in the world of high-end diners and arrogant managers. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her sister, Mia. "You okay? Haven't heard from you in a while." Jasmine smiled faintly. Mia always knew when something was wrong. She quickly typed a reply. I'm okay, just work stuff. I'll call you tomorrow, promise. The moment she hit send, the back door creaked open. Jasmine looked up to see Mr. Samuel standing there, looking a bit more put together than he had the night before. His hair was neatly combed, and he wore a fresh coat. He seemed more confident this time. "Mr. Samuel," Jasmine said, surprised to see him again so soon. "What are you doing here?" I wanted to thank you again for what you did for me yesterday. I know it wasn't the usual thing to do, and I can see that you're not like the others here," he said, his voice warm but laced with a hint of hesitation. Jasmine smiled, trying to hide her frustration with the whole situation. "You don't have to thank me. It was just soup." Mr. Samuel shook his head. It wasn't just soup. You treated me with dignity when no one else did, and that means more than you'll ever know." The sincerity in his words hit Jasmine deeply. She wasn't sure why, but she suddenly felt like crying. It wasn't because of Carl's reprimand or the tension she had been feeling at work. It was because of the way Mr. Samuel had looked at her, his eyes full of appreciation, not pity. "I'm just trying to do the right thing," Jasmine said softly, looking down at her shoes. "But sometimes it feels like doing the right thing isn't enough. People don't always understand." Mr. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "It's not about understanding, Jasmine. It's about doing what's right, no matter who's watching. You made my day, and I haven't forgotten that. You probably saved me more than just a meal. You saved me some hope." Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm glad I could help, really," she said, her voice catching in her chest. "Listen, I don't have much, but I do know a few people who could help you out. If you ever need anything, you call me. I don't know what you're going through, but I can see your heart, and I think that's worth something." Tears filled Jasmine's eyes as she tried to blink them away. It wasn't often that she heard kind words like this, especially not from someone who had so little themselves. She had grown up fighting for every scrap of kindness she received. But Mr. Samuel's words, were different. They were a lifeline in a world that seemed to have forgotten the meaning of empathy. "Thank you," Jasmine said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll keep that in mind." Mr. Samuel smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Just keep doing what you're doing, Jasmine. You're making more of a difference than you realize." With that, he turned and walked out of the door, leaving Jasmine standing there, feeling lighter than she had all day. The next morning, Jasmine woke up early, the quiet of the morning giving her a chance to reflect on the conversation she'd had with Mr. Samuel. She wasn't sure how his kind words would change her life, but she knew they had planted a seed, a reminder that kindness was never wasted. As she arrived at the Diamond Grill, she was greeted with a cold silence from the rest of the staff. They all seemed to be avoiding her, whispering behind her back. It didn't take long for her to realize what had happened. Word had spread about what she'd done the previous night, her kindness toward Mr. Samuel, the homeless man, and now the rest of the staff was distancing themselves from her. Carl didn't waste any time in cornering her again. "Jasmine, we need to talk," Carl said, his voice tight with anger. "I told you not to give away food, and yet you went behind my back and did it again. Do you have any idea what kind of message that sends?" Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to hold on to the calm she had gained from Mr. Samuel's words. "Carl, I didn't do anything wrong. He needed food, and I helped him." Carl scoffed. "You don't get it, do you? This is a business, and when you give food away to someone who can't pay, it makes us look bad. It's bad for business, Jasmine. You're lucky I didn't fire you yesterday." Jasmine felt her blood boil, but she held her ground. "I'm not sorry for what I did, Carl. I helped someone in need. I thought that was what we were supposed to do, help people." Carl's eyes flashed with irritation. "I've had enough of this. If you can't follow the rules, then maybe this job isn't for you." Jasmine's mind raced as Carl's words echoed in her head. It was as if everything she had worked for was hanging by a thin thread ready to snap. She had tried to remain calm, but the weight of Carl's anger was unbearable. Her chest tightened, and her palms started to sweat as she stood there, feeling like a child being scolded. "I don't know what you want from me, Carl," Jasmine said, her voice shaking with emotion but firm in her conviction. "I can't just stand by when I see someone hungry. I won't apologize for that." Carl's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Jasmine thought he might actually fire her on the spot. His face twisted in frustration, and his voice came out in a low growl. "You think this is about you being a hero? It's not. This is about business. If you can't see that, then maybe you don't belong here." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had never felt more alone than in that moment. The man who had been in charge of her livelihood, the one who held her future in his hands, was cold and unyielding. She had hoped that at least one person in this world would understand the value of compassion. But instead, she was being punished for something that, in her eyes, was right. She took a deep breath, refusing to let her emotions get the better of her. "I'll do what you want, Carl," she said quietly. "But I'm not going to stop being kind. Not for you, or anyone." Carl stared at her for a moment, and for a second, she thought he might soften. But then he shook his head, his face returning to its usual hard expression. "Fine," he said curtly, "but don't think I won't be watching you. One more mistake and you're gone. Get back to work." Jasmine nodded, feeling the sting of his words but standing tall. She turned and walked away, the weight of her situation crashing down on her. But deep inside, a fire had been ignited. She wasn't going to back down. If Carl thought that his threats would silence her, he was wrong. The days that followed were a blur. Jasmine went to work, putting on a brave face and trying to act like everything was fine, even though she felt like she was walking on eggshells. Carl's eyes were always on her, his gaze a constant reminder of the tension between them. Every time she offered a kind word to a customer, or went out of her way to make someone feel welcome, she felt his disapproving stare like a weight on her shoulders. But despite the fear of being reprimanded, something inside Jasmine began to shift. The kindness she had shown Mr. Samuel had left a mark on her that she couldn't ignore. As the days passed, she started to notice other small acts of kindness happening around the restaurant. A colleague would take a moment to help an older guest with their coat. A customer would offer a compliment to the chef after a great meal. It was as if the kindness she had shown had sparked something in others, and Jasmine began to feel that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one who believed in helping others. One afternoon, as she was wiping down a table, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Hey, Jasmine." She looked up to see Grace, one of the other waitresses, standing nearby. Grace was in her mid-20s, with a friendly smile and an easygoing personality. They had never been close, but they had exchanged pleasantries over the past few months. Jasmine noticed that Grace had been avoiding her a little more since Carl's warning, but today, she looked different. "You doing okay?" Grace asked, her tone softer than usual. Jasmine hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just trying to get through the day." Grace glanced around to make sure no one was watching, and then she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Listen, I wanted to say something. I saw what you did for that guy the other night. Mr. Samuel, I know Carl's not happy about it, but I think what you did was right. He needed help, and you gave it to him." Jasmine's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected anyone to say anything positive. "You really think so?" Grace nodded, a genuine smile on her face. "Yeah, I do, and I don't think you should apologize for it. I know Carl's a hard ass, but sometimes you have to follow your heart, you know?" Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. Grace's words were like a breath of fresh air. She had been so focused on Carl's judgment that she hadn't stopped to think about how her actions had impacted others. Maybe she wasn't alone in this after all. "Thanks, Grace," Jasmine said, her voice thick with emotion. "I really needed to hear that." Grace smiled warmly. "Anytime, and if you ever need to talk, I'm here." With that, Grace walked off, leaving Jasmine standing there, her heart a little lighter. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind her that she wasn't fighting this battle alone. She wasn't the only one who believed in the power of kindness. As the week went on, Jasmine continued to face Carl's icy demeanor. She had been walking on eggshells, trying to keep her head down and avoid any more conflicts. But the more she worked in the restaurant, the more she realized that the Diamond Grill was not the place she wanted to stay forever. The constant pressure to please the wealthy customers, the unrelenting standards of perfection, and Carl's cold authority had begun to wear her down. But one evening, just as Jasmine was about to leave for the night, she received an unexpected visit from Mr. Samuel. He was standing outside the back door, leaning on a cane, a warm smile on his face. "Mr. Samuel?" Jasmine said, surprised to see him again. "What are you doing here?" "I've been doing some thinking," he said, his voice steady and calm. "You're a good person, Jasmine. You didn't just help me because you felt sorry for me. You helped me because it was the right thing to do." Jasmine felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had been so focused on the negativity around her that she hadn't stopped to think about the positive impact she had made. Mr. Samuel had noticed her kindness, and he appreciated it. "I just want to thank you," he said, pulling a business card from his coat pocket. "I know people, Jasmine, people who could use someone like you. If you ever want to get out of here, if you ever want a real opportunity, you give me a call." Jasmine looked at the card in her hand, her mind racing. She hadn't expected anything like this. It was an offer she hadn't even thought possible. An opportunity to leave the Diamond Grill and do something meaningful, something that didn't compromise her values. "Thank you, Mr. Samuel," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. I'll think about it." He smiled at her once more before turning and walking away, leaving Jasmine standing there holding the card. Her heart raced as the weight of the offer sank in. It was as though the universe had given her a chance to leave behind the world that had been so suffocating, to pursue something better. For the first time in weeks, Jasmine felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. The following days were filled with an unsettling sense of anticipation. Jasmine couldn't stop thinking about the business card Mr. Samuel had given her. It was just a card, a piece of paper, but it symbolized something far more important. An opportunity. An opportunity to escape the toxic environment of the Diamond Grill and create a life where she could make a real difference. But even as she toyed with the idea, doubts clouded her mind. What would happen if she left? She needed the job, and as difficult as it was, it paid the bills. She had responsibilities, rent to cover, utilities, groceries. And besides, what if Mr. Samuel's offer was a one-time thing? What if it was just a kind gesture with no real future behind it? Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the card was a sign that maybe, just maybe, there was something more for her beyond the confines of the restaurant. The breaking point came during another grueling dinner shift. Carl was in rare form, throwing orders around with a cruel edge in his voice. He had become even more hostile after her altercation with Mr. Samuel. She'd hoped he would have let it go by now, but instead, it seemed like he was watching her every move, ready to pounce on any small mistake. Jasmine was serving a table of high-profile guests when she accidentally spilled a drink on the lap of one of the men. She had been distracted by Carl's harsh reprimands in the kitchen and didn't notice how close she was to the table. The man shot up from his chair, visibly furious. "What is wrong with you, lady? Do you even know how to serve?" Jasmine's heart raced. She wanted to apologize, to fix the situation, but before she could speak, Carl appeared, his face a mask of fury. "This is unacceptable," Carl shouted, glaring at Jasmine. "You've been nothing but trouble lately. I've warned you, but you clearly don't know how to follow basic instructions." Jasmine's cheeks burned as Carl continued to berate her in front of the entire restaurant. She could feel the eyes of every guest on her, judging her, humiliating her. She had made a mistake, yes, but this felt like something more than a simple error. It felt like a deliberate attempt to crush her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but Carl didn't let up. "Sorry doesn't cut it," he barked, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "If you can't keep up, you're out of here." The man whose lap she had spilled the drink on sneered at her. "That's right, she doesn't belong here." Jasmine stood there, frozen, as Carl turned to walk away. For a split second, everything seemed to stop. The noise of the restaurant faded, and all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart in her ears. She had never felt so humiliated, so small. The room felt suffocating, as if the walls were closing in on her. She had given everything she had to this job, her time, her energy, her heart, and in return, all she had received was disdain. But then, something inside her shifted. It was as if the humiliation, the fear, and the frustration all fused into a single moment of clarity. She had had enough. With shaking hands, Jasmine grabbed her apron and tossed it onto the counter. The kitchen fell silent as the weight of her decision hung in the air. She turned to the stunned faces around her and walked straight out of the kitchen, past the tables, and toward the back door. Carl's angry voice followed her, but she didn't turn back. She didn't care anymore. This job, this place, it wasn't worth it. As she stepped into the cool night air, she felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had finally stood up for herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. As the days passed since her dramatic exit from the Diamond Grill, Jasmine found herself in uncharted waters. There was a strange mix of liberation and uncertainty. She had done the unthinkable, walked away from a job she had clung to for survival. But now, the weight of her decision settled in. What would happen next? How would she make ends meet? She spent a few days recovering from the emotional toll, resting and reflecting. She had given so much of herself to that job, pouring out her energy, her patience, and her heart, only to be left drained and disrespected. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that leaving wasn't just an act of rebellion. It was an act of self-love. She had chosen herself. Still, the uncertainty gnawed at her. Was Mr. Samuel's offer genuine? Was she really ready to step into something completely new, or was she merely grasping at a lifeline in desperation? Her mind swirled with questions. And then, one evening, after pacing back and forth, she realized that inaction was not the answer. She couldn't just sit there hoping for a miracle to happen. She needed to take the next step. No more hesitation, no more waiting. Jasmine picked up the phone, dialed Mr. Samuel's number, and as the line rang, her heart raced. "Hello?" Mr. Samuel's calm voice came through. "Mr. Samuel, this is Jasmine. I wanted to follow up on the offer you gave me. Is it still open?" Her voice wavered slightly, but she was determined. "Absolutely," he replied with reassuring warmth. "I was hoping you'd call. Come by tomorrow and we'll talk details. I think you're going to be a great fit here." Jasmine let out a sigh of relief, grateful that he hadn't forgotten about her, that the door wasn't closed. The next day, Jasmine found herself standing in front of a modest office building that contrasted sharply with the luxury and pretense of the Diamond Grill. The streets here were quieter, the buildings less imposing, and the atmosphere felt peaceful. She wasn't sure what she expected, but it felt like a fresh start, like something genuine. Mr. Samuel greeted her with an easy smile, his face kind but serious. "Come in, Jasmine. We have a lot to discuss." Inside, the office was practical. No lavish decor or grandiose displays of wealth. The space felt grounded, and Jasmine immediately felt at ease. As they sat down, Mr. Samuel leaned forward, offering her a genuine smile. "You've made the right choice," he said softly. "I think you'll find this work incredibly fulfilling. It's not about status or the big paycheck. It's about helping people, and that's something I think you've always been good at." Jasmine blinked, surprised by the clarity of his words. "I want to do something meaningful. I've been stuck in places that don't care about people, just the money. I'm tired of that." Mr. Samuel nodded. "Exactly. Here, we believe in people. I want you to be part of something bigger than just getting by. I have a team, a group of people who share the same vision." We focus on training, mentoring, and lifting others up. We help those who have been left behind, just like you have." As he spoke, Jasmine felt a wave of hope wash over her. She wasn't sure what it was, but something about Mr. Samuel's words resonated deeply. She had been looking for a way out of the cycle, a way to find peace and fulfillment, and it seemed like she might have found it here. Jasmine dove headfirst into her new role with a passion she hadn't known she was capable of. The first few days were a blur as she got familiar with the team and the work that lay ahead. But this time, there was no pressure, no rush. She was working for something real, something that mattered. The gratitude of her colleagues and the people they helped filled her heart, and for the first time in years, Jasmine felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Her days were no longer spent catering to the whims of rude customers or enduring Carl's cruel remarks. Now, she was in an office where ideas flowed freely, where everyone was encouraged to contribute, and where success was measured not by money, but by the impact they made in people's lives. But even with the new start, Jasmine couldn't shake the weight of her past. She found herself wondering about the people still stuck in toxic workplaces, the ones who, like her, had been trained to put up with cruelty and disrespect. It was a bitter thought. And then there was Grace. Jasmine hadn't heard from her since she'd left the Diamond Grill. They had promised to stay in touch, but Jasmine knew how hard it was to make that leap of faith. She couldn't help but wonder, had Grace found her own way out? One evening, as Jasmine was wrapping up her work, her phone buzzed. She saw Grace's name on the screen and immediately picked up. "Jasmine!" Grace's voice was full of energy. "I did it! I finally quit! I'm free!" Jasmine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Grace, you really did it? I'm so proud of you. That's huge." "I couldn't take it anymore," Grace said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I was suffocating in there. I needed something more, just like you. And now, I feel like I can breathe again." Jasmine smiled, feeling a rush of joy for her friend. "I know exactly what you mean. It's like this weight has been lifted. I'm so happy for you." "I'm not done yet, though," Grace continued. "I've been thinking about starting something of my own, helping people like us, people who've been mistreated who don't know how to get out." Jasmine's heart swelled with pride. "You're going to be amazing at it. We can do this together. We can build something bigger, help more people." For the first time, Jasmine saw a clear vision of her future, one where she didn't just help individuals. She created a movement, a ripple effect of change that started with a simple act of kindness, and now was transforming lives in ways she had never imagined. Months passed, and Jasmine continued to find herself in the center of a growing movement. Through her work with Mr. Samuel's organization, she had not only helped countless individuals find a new sense of purpose, but she had also found a sense of family. She had become a mentor, a guide, and a source of support for people who had been lost in the same way she once was. Her work was fulfilling, but Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to do more. She wanted to reach the people who had been left behind, the ones who hadn't yet found the courage to take that first step toward change. She knew that there were others just like her, trapped in the same cycle of judgment and pain. One afternoon, Mr. Samuel called her into his office. As she entered, he smiled warmly. "Jasmine, I've been thinking about you. You've done incredible work here. I believe it's time for you to take the next step, helping us reach more people." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, her heart quickening. "What do you mean?" Mr. Samuel's gaze was steady. "I want you to help lead an initiative that goes beyond this office. We're going to launch a nationwide campaign to bring attention to workplace abuse, the toxicity of judgment, and the power of kindness. You'll be the face of it. I believe you're ready." Jasmine's pulse raced. This was it, the opportunity she had been waiting for. She had spent so long feeling small, insignificant, but now her story was going to be heard. It was time to share what she had learned, to give others the hope that she had found. "I don't know what to say," Jasmine whispered, overwhelmed by emotion. "I never imagined this for myself." You've earned it, Mr. Samuel said, his voice filled with pride. You've touched lives in ways you may never fully realize. You've been the change people needed, and now you can be the change on a bigger scale. As Jasmine left his office, she felt the weight of his words settle into her heart. She had come so far from the girl who had once feared taking risks, the girl who had been too afraid to speak up. She had stepped into a life that was bigger than herself, a life that was about helping others, lifting them up, and showing them what was possible. That evening, as Jasmine walked home, the rain began to fall. It wasn't the kind of rain that brought gloom. It was the kind of rain that refreshed, that nourished, that reminded her of the new beginning she had found. Her journey wasn't just her own. It was a collective movement of change, of kindness, of hope. And with each step, Jasmine knew one thing for sure. The ripple effect of kindness would continue to spread, changing lives one by one, until the world was a better place for everyone.